No problem.
Because it's a great privilege of a handful of leaders in this space who run nonprofit organizations or who help evaluate and develop nonprofit organizations. That the results for America, folks coined the farm team for the purposes of this discussion. And we are going to pose a few questions to our esteemed panel, who I will introduce in a moment, to get us into some conversation around what does it really take to spur more organizations, more innovations that can fulfill the vision of being able to play Moneyball for government. I'll share a little bit of a joke and an anecdote. Recently I had the opportunity to be in a discussion with some folks in different federal agencies around opportunities for disconnected youth. And we were talking on a range of matters: education, jobs, health, whatnot, and discussing the populating what was rising to the top at some of the various clearinghouses. And one of the domains that was under discussion, somebody sort of cracked the joke that there wasn't enough evidence to populate a clearinghouse, maybe enough for a clearing hut. So at some level, that's a little bit of our charge, to be in this discussion and ultimately come out with some action steps that we can report back around what does it really take to help more organizations be able to engage, I think, more productively at the heels of the conversation that we just had. Building their own evidence, helping others come into the space to build theirs, so we have a more robust pipeline of what works that can be held up for government, that can win some of these competitive funding streams and these new innovations that are coming down in different ways. There's a couple more chairs.
Yeah, please, can we get more chairs? Can we send people out to get chairs?
Were you able to? Yes.
I've sent them an email.
Someone's bringing chairs?
I've sent an email asking for some.
Okay. All right. So there are 4 chairs that folks can sit. Grab chairs.
Nobody wants to run. I'll sit on your lap.
Save that for you, Ed.
You can prove to people that I don't bite.
I don't snore.
So let's jump in here. We are blessed with 4 extraordinary human beings who are going to help us be in this conversation. The legendary Dorothy Stoneman, Queen of Youthbuild, who most of you know, almost everybody knows. The visionary John Martinex, who has just contributed so much to helping youth-serving organizations understand evidence, build evidence, and advocate for disadvantaged youth through his other job besides his role at MDRC. The incomparable Dan Cardinali. And I think many of you that know Dan or know communities and schools know the story of a large-scale network that has gone through significant change management and taken a run at building evidence, taking quality seriously, all in the name of making the world better for kids.
Pressure's on.
The mighty Tripp in his leadership role at New Profit really has helped push the envelope to financing social entrepreneurs, stretching the definition of grant making, and providing growth capital to some of the most exciting generations, arguably, that exist in this space today. So, gentlemen and young lady, I'm going to ask each of you to spend about 3 minutes giving us your thoughts on what you think it takes to build a strong pipeline of innovators who can play Moneyball, and how you would encourage us to think about supporting organizations, growing organizations, helping current organizations be better positioned to take advantage of, I'm going to say pay for success, Tripp. I know you want to know that pay for success rate, but the performance partnerships, innovation funding. How do we help organizations grow in position to take advantage of these revenue streams? And what do we need from things like results first, or other ways of managing data, kayak for the direct business, that can help shore up what's really working to those who need to make applications. Tripp?
Put me on the spot first. So, thank you, Kelly. Great to be participating with everybody here. So, first thing that I would say is that I think we've done a great job raising expectations. So, in starting sort of this conversation, when you talk to people, and by the way, as a guy who spent meaningful chunks of my life in the public and the for-profit and non-profit social sectors, I think this is much about for-profit organizations as it is non-profit. So having spent 8 years building a $1 billion for-profit social enterprise, you know, many of the challenges that we're seeing in the non-profit sector are applicable in that space as well. And we should, in this world, in my view, think as we think about how we're going to evolve, what we're doing to address these issues, think as much about the for-profit space as we do the non-profit space. But I think we've done a reasonably solid job in the country and in the space that we operate in raising expectations that if you are going to succeed, you're going to succeed in part because you're going to do an exceptional job addressing issues related to monitoring and evaluation of what you do and evidencing the fact that it's having an impact. So that's been great. As it relates to what we do to answer your question, Kelly, what we do to try to help these organizations to do better, I do think one key thing that I would say is that we've got to embrace this pay for success movement and really accept the fact that there is a lot right about the notion that we're going to have organizations being paid to deliver outcomes and results, and really see that as a tool that will allow us that are committed to working in this arena, recognizing all the challenges and the risks, some of which we just talked about upstairs, say this can work, this is the right thing to do, we should have that set of expectations in this arena. The second thing that I would focus on, I'll try to hit the 3 minutes here, I'm sure I'll go a little bit over, tools and techniques. The organizations that are committed to doing this work right now are struggling mightily with how simply to get the work done. For those of you that don't know, New Profit was an investor. I played a role in helping to put together and structure this, what is the country's largest social impact bond deal in Massachusetts. Wonderful experience. It's a treat actually not to be on a panel talking about just that these days. But anyway, ROCA, which is the provider, Molly Baldwin's up there talking about it right now, has been around, and she'll say all the time, it took 25 years of work to get into a place where she and her team had the capacity, the tools, the experience to be able to do what they're now doing that enables them to get this chunk of money and the attention that they're getting. It can't take 25 years anymore. It would be inexcusable, but it does take time, it does take tools, it takes resources. We've got to be really creative, I would argue, in thinking about less expensive ways to do evaluation. We've got to get more sophisticated in distinguishing what we at New Profit describe as monitoring from evaluation. What does that look like? I won't go in the weeds on that. We're at a point where we need a whole new degree of knowledge, clarity, and tools and techniques around how we talk about, discuss, educate, train people who are committed to doing evidence-based work. That would be the second. I also believe that one of the things we can do, broadly defined, is we've got to change and advance the expectations of funders. I say that representing a funder group these days. This stuff is hard. It takes time. The real help organizations need to be able to do better and to succeed at this require different types of investment, a different kind of patience, a different kind of attitude and approach to basically working with these organizations to help them to be able to develop the capacity to have the tools to do what needs to be done. So I know you're looking for 3 minutes. I'll stop there. Happy to go more in the weeds.
We'll come back to some of those points. Thanks, Dan?
A couple of things. First of all, I just want to acknowledge the room. Most of these people, not only do I know well, but are true colleagues in this work. So I'm not sure how much new I'm going to say. So not knowing that, but intuiting that might be the case, I was thinking about two things. One, I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine whose job it is to think about nonprofit leadership. And she was looking at the frame that had historically been used, and they're a rather important player in a community. And she noted that the frame for nonprofit leadership had nothing about in terms of their accountability, whether they were actually driving increased results in their work. And then she looked at the actual leadership frame, and there was nothing about results in building leadership. So it got me thinking about where are the levers that are maybe the unsuspecting levers that actually are like the cornerstone ways to embed this kind of work, so that it doesn't have to be a huge, massive program, that there are a number of insertion points that would flip the kind of work. And then part of that got me thinking about how many nonprofits there are. I thought about our own network. So what, 1.8 million nonprofits, 1.5, a huge number. The vast number of those that are in the health and human service space are actually relatively under-resourced. Our own network has only about half of our network survives on about $500,000 or less across the country. So there aren't any, there's no bandwidth to even build the momentum or capacity. And then I got thinking about the effect of charter schools in the US. Regardless of your opinions of charter schools, it's pretty clear that charter schools that do well are those that belong to networks. They routinely outperform the others. So I got thinking there's something about collective work where you can have the frontline on the ground work focused on quality and having these kind of systems that allow for efficiencies, both in these like leadership development, but also in aggregating enough resources to do evaluation and put performance management systems in place, and have the kind of management structures that allow for folks going from compliance to data-driven decision making. So I offer those two up for today. All of us are thinking about this all the time. What are those unsuspecting cornerstone nodes that we can focus in on that would unleash a disproportionate amount of kind of appetite or capacity? And then how can we aggregate kind of the necessary resources that are so difficult to muster to both support folks in leadership as well as do the kind of evaluation performance management work?
Good afternoon. I guess it's afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Kelly mentioned, I'm from MDRC, which we do a lot of evaluation, but I come at it from a slightly different angle. I spent a lot of my time at MDRC working with nonprofits, trying to help them understand where they are on the continuum of evidence and really evaluating where they need to go next. And as Kelly alluded to, my other job, besides at MDRC, is I'm also the board chair of the National Youth Employment Coalition. So I spent a lot of time working with nonprofits, just thinking about a lot of the issues and evidence has been coming up over and over again. So I just wanted to say a couple of things, with that, and thinking about the perspective of how do we think about building evidence within nonprofits. And I think there's something that Jean mentioned that really resonated with me, and it's how do we position rigorous evaluation so it's not just a thumbs up, thumbs down. And I think that's the concern. A lot of people feel like if they get into this and it says my program doesn't work, that's it, you're done. And I think from our perspective, it's really an opportunity to think about it in terms of continuous improvement. This is an opportunity to really figure out what's working, what's not working, and what direction do we need to take it in. And I think a perfect example of that is, New York City Center for Employment Opportunity did a RCT. Great results on recidivism. They work with a criminal justice population. Not so great on the employment. That's okay. They figured out, here we have something that's really working. Let's build on this. We found out something that's not working that we thought it was. How can we improve it? And I think that's the kind of spin we need to put on things and how we need to think about rigorous evaluation if we're going to get more nonprofits on board in terms of thinking about how can we use this to continue to build our evidence and continue to improve our programs. I think the other challenge is that more and more nonprofits are recognizing, and more in general recognizing the value of evidence, but the challenge is there's still some confusion about what constitutes rigorous evidence. And in a lot of ways, I think that organizations that subject themselves to more rigorous types of evaluations are then being compared to organizations that allow themselves to participate in like less rigorous. So you're really comparing apples and oranges, and really we need to talk about and think about that level of rigor and include that in our discussions about what the evidence is suggesting, and recognize that often if you're using a more rigorous design, the outcome levels might be lower, the impacts, might not be as strong as what you might have been expecting, but you can learn a lot about what's happening. And I think in both of those, the real opportunity is around these clearinghouses and really being able to document what the evidence says, as long as that level of rigor is part of the inclusion in that. And then I think that the last thing I'll say is that one of the other things that I've seen a lot of that I think is really interesting is I think on the federal level and sometimes at the state and local level, you're seeing more focus on rigorous evidence at the federal level, but I think still it's sometimes at the state and local level you're seeing more of a focus on process measures. So it's really still more about how many hours of service are you delivering, not what difference are you making. So it's a real kind of conflicting message, and it's great we're really trying to attack this at the federal level. But I think there are a lot of opportunities at the state and local level to really try and help people understand that ultimately what matters is what difference your program is making and what outcomes are you achieving. So I'll stop there.
I'm enjoying the candor of this discussion. This is great. And I'm wondering in the room, how many people here are in the nonprofit sector? And I don't mean and then how many are funders? So there's a smattering. So we know what we're facing. And I want to pick up on what Dan said about building the appetite and the capacity to address first of all, the performance management issues. I think, I want to say there's three things and then I'll go deeper into that. One is that we have a lack of clarity about what the words data-driven and rigorous really mean. And so I want to come back to that and describe it. In practice, what do they mean? We have lack of resources to achieve the whole spectrum of them. And then we also have in the nonprofit sector lack of information, knowledge, and wise guidance about what to do. And then we also don't enjoy enough the use of the data around what we're doing. And I think that we need to build a whole culture about, hey, guys, this is actually very exciting to look at what is happening on the ground and why is it happening, and can we figure out what it is that actually made this wonderful thing happen and how we make sure that that happens across our network. And really poring over the data on a regular basis and figuring it out and giving it to the field, and I think this is part of the value of the networks, is that if we can build a collective commitment, which is part of our moral responsibility, really. I mean, we're in this because we want to make a difference. And there's a lot of fear about people punishing us for inadequate data, but there's also a lot of joy in being able to produce results. And so if we can have the space to look deeply at what we're doing, if the funders will ask all of the grantees, okay, what are you going to measure? Why are you going to measure it? And what are you going to do about it once you've measured it? What's your internal process for reviewing what you collect and then moving to up the ante and up the outcomes? And so in Youthbuild a long time ago, we decided, okay, we're going to measure attendance, academic gains, academic achievement of GEDs and diplomas, placements in jobs and in college, wages, industry recognized certificates earned, length of stay in placements, and recidivism rates. And we're going to measure those across the network, so 200 different locations, giving that data on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, reviewing it, on an annual basis, getting back where they fit compared to all of their peers on all of these outcomes on a chart that does not reveal where their peers are, because you have to be careful about not shaming or humiliating people, but you want to inspire people to really want the information. And then we offer people assistance. And okay, you're in the lowest performing quartile, right? So we're lucky. Kresge Foundation comes in and says, we will support you in the improvement of these. So then we can go out and deliberately help the people who are, in our terms, failing. And so I really appreciated what, I'm not sure if it was Gina or one of the other speakers who was talking about, there's a challenge, there's a reform challenge, right? We know how we're doing that collectively, we know what's possible, because the best 10% are achieving this. What did they do to achieve that? And we know that across any kind of field, I'm sure we've had this experience, there's a continuum, right? It's amazing, it's not all the same, even if they're coming at it with similar design and perform. You've got different leadership, you've got different staff, you've got different conditions, you've got a lot of different things happening that's worth analyzing. And so taking a look at that continuum, being honest about it, about where you're at on it, helping people be honest about it, and helping them face that. Now, then there are a few that fall off the edge. They can't do better, they have terrible leadership, they have internal conflict, and you're just not going to continue. That percentage, for me, I've always used the question, we get feedback directly from young people about how's your program going, and whenever I have the opportunity, I ask young people who have criticism of their program, should we shut this program down? Only once in 35 years has any young person ever said, yes, it's doing harm. It's more like, I know it's doing a lot of good, but it's not good enough. Can you please come and help fix this and this and this, because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. Now, there's a lot of what we know matters, like we believe in the power of love, the power of caring adults. We heard about it at Grad Nation at the beginning of this week from every young person who spoke. That was what made a difference. And we can't, as Andre Green, who's on our data team, says, we cannot measure how many. He was before he joined the advocacy team. We can't measure how many gobs of love result in how many grade increase in reading. Some things are not quantifiable, but we can figure out what are the elements that are present in the most successful programs, and then how do we train the staff to bring those elements into what they do. And I think that's our job and our challenge. And in terms of the question about what do we mean, it's unclear, and it's somewhat partly competing, whether our definitions of rigorous and of data-driven are almost in competition with each other. I'm describing data-driven decision-making, performance management, knowledge development, and of course then you pull in some qualitative studies to figure out, well, what is the thing that's making a difference on this outcome we're seeing? Oh my God, we're seeing that the children of our graduates are doing great. Well, how do we find out why, and how do we find out how extensive is that? How do we make a case for that, do some qualitative stuff? But the word rigorous mostly seems to mean randomized trials, long-term investigation and evaluation. Does it mean that? Is that what rigorous means? If it does, we should say so. Right? If whenever we use the word rigorous, we really mean random assignment, we should say so, because it's confusing to people. What's rigorous? Performance management through data analysis and engagement of a field, that's rigorous. It takes rigor, it takes money, it takes constant attention. It should count, as rigorous. So what we mean by rigor is random assignment, let's say random assignment, because then we know what we're talking about. I would ask, and that would be helpful to us. And then what is it we're really asking the government to do? I really heard a bunch of things upstairs. There really was a continuum of asking the government to do performance-based analysis and a challenge to improve. And I think we're also asking them to do rigorous random assignment evaluation at certain stages in a process. So that's it for now.
Thanks. Let me ask the panel, Tripp, you led with a pretty clear position on there's an opportunity we should be embracing now to drive this conversation forward and on paper success. I'd like to ask the panel if there are other big opportunities now that David put out that we should consider embracing. Likewise, might help us clarify some of these definitional quandaries, raise the rigor of the sector, however it may ultimately be defined, and take advantage of an opportunity to bring more nonprofit or for-profit in-serving organizations into the space space that are signing up for making a difference for kids.
I have one thing that comes immediately to mind, and I'm not sure, it's the notion of the intersection between data and growing big data and access to it, coupled with technological ways to quickly use performance management to move people from compliance to data-driven decision. I think there's a set of things happening that will allow what are otherwise frontline workers who see this as other, actually a quick aha that what they're doing will improve their ability to drive outcomes for the kids they love and also be meaningful to the systems that hold their paychecks.
So it's driving, creating, advancing technology solutions that connect big data to outcomes generation?
That's part of it. So I think there are we have more and more access to public data, at least in the education space, and then linking that work to direct service work. And I think that we've heard a fair amount about the real importance about being clear about what you're trying to actually create as an outcome, and then using technology quickly to determine whether you're doing that or not. And in the spirit of learning, rather than saying it's binary, you then can change up practice. And you don't have to go through all this rigorous evaluation until you get a stable set of trends in your performance management system. That's very cost effective to do as this big data is moving.
Yeah, I'll throw one more out. There are these moments in time where there's enough enthusiasm and interest on the part of a broad enough cross-section of people about new approaches, like this sort of focus on evidence-based, pay-for-success stuff, where the good intentions of so many different parties allow for a special kind of investment in things that perhaps later on people will be less willing to invest in. So one of the reasons why I feel like we ought to, as a collective group, embrace this sort of movement in this time is because I think there are opportunities for organizations that are going to try to meet these new expectations to set the terms under which these experiments take place, and specifically to demand a certain type of resource to pursue certain types of pilots. We did that in the case of the Roca deal. Those terms can serve the interests of all the different parties. So demanding, in the case of the provider, demanding enough resources to actually be able to perform the work that's required to do the evaluation and monitoring. And again, we at New Profit distinguished the terms monitoring, sort of more focused on process, from true evaluation. Under what conditions the evaluation's done, who's doing it, what types of work needs to be done before things happen to enable there to be protections against misuse of information, getting the involvement and input of people who really know how to do this stuff. I mean, we talked about capacity, I said tools and techniques, that's really speaking to capacity. But there's a science as well as an art around how more sophisticated, capable organizations play this game, participate, and to really do it well, everybody, whether it's funders, whether those funders be private grant makers or whether they be public funders, I think in this particular moment of time will be more willing, more interested, more inclined to figure out ways, in part to understand and develop a means to do this kind of thing, to allow organizations to request and demand certain types of things that will enable them to be more likely to succeed, to be able to have the resources to give it a real shot. And I would push that hard.
That's great.
I think while we're talking about pay for success, we should also think about other ways that we could build in paying for success that are not social impact bonds.
Totally,
So-
that's what I mean, by the
Right,
way.
you do. So
Totally.
for example, I mean, if we've got federal money coming into a state for a program which is doing great, then why can't we go to the state governments and say, look, the feds have already put in $10 million
That's
in the
right.
state. Now, these are the outcomes that we promised to achieve, and if we achieve these outcomes, will you pick up the cost for this going forward, because we can demonstrate the
Yep.
savings to society of this. We don't have to get the for-profit sector in investing to get, a profit back from the taxpayer on stuff which could just have already been seeded by the federal government, which the Department of Labor did, initiate its own form of pay for success.
Right.
And I think we're confused. It is confusing when we use the pay for success language when we are meaning the social impact bond, which is a very particular kind of pay for success.
But I'm not sure that wasn't.
No, my intent was to use pay for success, little p, little f, little s,
I
as
see.
opposed
Okay.
to social impact bonds
Okay.
exclusively.
Right.
Which, by the way, has been around for a long time, right? Like, for those of us that have operated in this arena, this whole notion, somehow this is a brand new thing. It's obviously not.
Kathy, I might actually turn to you. This might be an opportune moment to talk about performance partnerships a little bit and how we might want to think about that in this conversation.
It's great to listen to this conversation. So performance partnership pilots for disconnected youth, does people know what that is?
But not everyone. You should
Okay,
explain.
2014 appropriations bill for labor, HHS, education, covers CNCS and Institute of Museum and Library Services. We have the authority for this year for up to 10 pilots where the federal government will enter into an agreement with, it can be with a locality working with the state working with one or more localities, it can be a regional partnership, but essentially that applicant coming from the state or local level is bringing to us an outcome-focused strategy for disconnected youth, saying we want to achieve better outcomes on education, employment, potentially other measures of well-being. And we need an outcome-focused plan. We need outcomes, interim indicators, so that when we enter this agreement, we know we can be tracking progress over time. That partnership, those state or local entities can blend money from any youth serving program into a single budget, and essentially, wipe the slate clean, start from scratch, do what a lot of the social impact bonds are trying to do, but it's with government money, it's with public money. Potentially, maybe there could be private sector funding as well, for a for-profit sector, but it could also, we ideally would like foundations, nonprofits, partnerships that bring all of the assets in a community together to get better outcomes. And so, picking up on your network point and the tools and techniques point, we are hoping that this is an opportunity to really lift those up. And one of the challenges we have, and I'd love to push this back at you, is at the federal level, we see some of these great examples, and we hear, when Linda Gibbs comes in and gives a presentation on New York City and the Young Men's Initiative and how they use data and evidence, you sit back and say, wow. We see, private sector, like Social Solutions, has done efforts to outcome software. And we would love to be in a position where all of the nonprofits or the foundations out there wanting to do this work can see those best examples. It's very hard for us at the federal level to pluck those out and put them up because we're endorsing, we're giving the impression that we've pre-selected these groups and so to the extent that you guys can organize something on the outside that identifies what are these things, how do we make them available? So everybody can use them, and then we can really accelerate, because we can't change the way government does business unless we have more people using those tools and techniques.
And just to build on that, one of the other things that I was thinking about was, there have been all these kind of government initiatives, like I3 and the SIP and things like that. And I think that is such a good example of organizations that had earlier invested in trying to move their evidence base kind of up the continuum, and how that was able to be translated into an effort to scale because they had some kind of evidence base. Here's the government looking for, opportunities to scale things that work. And that's such a success story, and I'm not sure if that's been lifted in such a way to show that places like, NFP and, Teach for America, Success for All these programs that have really been able to take advantage of some of these efforts to scale what they're doing based on their track record on evidence are getting lifted up enough to show that, when you build evidence, good things can happen in terms of being able to scale.
Coming back to the random assignment, one of the things that struck me in what John Barron wrote, what David Bornstein wrote, that I wasn't aware of, and I imagine a lot of other nonprofit people are not, is that there are a lot of examples of low-cost, random assignment, not long random assignment selection trials, but just comparison groups that people could do. It would be really useful if the results-based folks could put together a huge compendium of low-cost random comparisons, so that those of us who are thinking about, well, what could we do for $60,000 or $150,000 that would make our case, could have those ideas generated.
Can I just weigh in a little bit? So my only fear on that, I think it's important, provided that it doesn't turn into a binary decision, right? And so that low-cost stuff really does lend itself to a go, no-go, good, bad, thumbs up, thumbs down. We want to be careful that we don't lose the learning that would be embedded in a more costly study where there's, we heard all upstairs across the board, implementation study, so that we understand what, so just there's a balancing act.
Yeah, I wasn't meaning it that way at all.
Yeah,
was
I know
meaning
you weren't, but I just
people
wanted to
to
flag it.
Get that information for themselves and then figure out how to use it.
And the tool of doing that low cost is basically linking data sets. And it actually has huge applicability just to performance measurement.
That's right.
If you can link the data sets, like what we would like to do with performance partnerships is be able to link the employment data and the educational achievement data for individuals, so we know how they're doing on both. And once you figure out how to do it, it's incredible.
Have you figured it out?
And how to use it. Well, I'll give you an example. The Department of Education, they needed to look at employment outcomes for students in for-profit institutions. And they looked around at the different ways of doing it and realized that Social Security Administration has the data from the IRS. And for a long time, it was like, oh my gosh, no, you can't do that. That's privacy. Well, you got the lawyers in the room, and they said, well, wait a minute. Social Security Administration can release aggregate data. So as long as you push the individual data in, you match it behind the curtain, and you push it out in cohorts. Well, the first match, it took, this was nationwide institutions, and it took a lot of startup work to get it all ready. It was $200,000. Subsequent matches are like $30,000, and that's nationwide.
That's amazing. Is that available to the public or just to the government?
Not at this point, but but in terms of thinking about it, like a vision for where we could be going in the future, how do we link data sets, across programs and across levels of government and find much more efficient ways of using the data we have? It would
Yeah, but I think one of the, and maybe there's a role for our, RFA in this. There's also an education piece, because I think often, if you're a program operating within a state or a locality, and you're going to go to your state or locality to access that data, I think sometimes the knee-jerk reaction is to be as conservative as possible. No, the rules say we can't do that, but actually when you dig into the rules, you can do that. But it's it's folks that understand the legal side, but not the policy implication side in terms of what you can do with this data. So there's a role for educating at the state and local level around how we can really push the envelope in terms of using those kinds of data sources.
And I would add to that advocacy as well. It's the education, but it's also the advocacy and really sort of getting the political will to have people actually move those systems and have those conversations to share that information with local programs on the ground so that they know how to navigate those systems.
Let me open it up to the floor also to ask any questions of the panel, or if there are ideas of things that RFA could do or others could do to help build the farm team.
Yeah, hi, Dave Hawkinson. I'm with America Achieves. This is a little off, but I'm just wondering, based on my own experience, if you have found that educating and engaging boards of directors or trustees of the nonprofits is a critical element or even barrier to overcome. My own experience is that they're not sufficient, but having them engaged and supportive is a necessary precondition to really using this.
So I would push on that.
And you would
right,
have,
we have 200 nonprofits in our network. So I would actually say that it's more than just, I think it is a critical piece, and that's a little bit what I meant by the leadership. I was a little blunt, but not just executive director. It is, in fact, boards holding their leadership accountable in a way that it makes sense, and again, is constructive. getting boards to be good fiduciary agents is tough enough. So adding this piece onto it, I think it's a reality check, that these are citizen boards who come together around a passion, in our case, for disenfranchised youth, who they want to, make public education work. So now to translate that into effective program work is, it's not a light lift. So I go back to the role of networks as being critically important to be able to make that as easy as possible. But we're investing nationally a fair amount of money in the quality of our boards for this very reason.
So we have a very similar view, and would say that in this particular, as it relates to the substance of what we're talking about today, the board can play as important a role as any player in shaping the whole dynamic around the work and the conversation regarding this stuff. So when it comes to expectations, creating a comfort on the part of the management team, the staff more generally, that's where the governance piece is so key. Figuring out how to do all of this in a way in which there's adequate support, adequate understanding that when things don't work out exactly the way everybody hoped, it's not going to be the end of the world. So couldn't agree more. I think it's a great point.
Sometimes you have to use unrestricted funds for your data teams, so you need board engagement.
Right.
Any other questions?
John Goberts from America's Promise, but I'll make a comment like Ron did from a previous life, and I'll ask Paul to chime in. But I think one thing that we're both refugees from the Corporation for National and Community Service. And,
Graduates.
Refugees. And we sat in the room while performance measures were being developed. And we experienced the pressure from OMB. And I will tell you, there's a lot of AmeriCorps grantees in this room. I will tell you, it was a terrifying, just a terrifying process. And I think that one of the things, I don't think the government's very good at this. I don't think there are very many people in government who are very sophisticated about this kind of measurement or evidence, and they are making very strong judgments. And if you don't think it's a go, no-go when your AmeriCorps application is there, you're just wrong. It's just, it's a lot of people under a lot of pressure with a big piece of evidence. Boom, I don't see what I need to see, you're out. That's a harsh judgment. It's a really, really harsh judgment. So one of the things that I think RFA could really help with is, and nonprofits could help with, is to help government get better at this. Because I think the consequence of government funding is a big part of this, whether it's in various forms of pay for success or in grant programs that are looking more and more towards evidence-based, quote unquote, with a bunch of people who don't actually know what evidence or evidence-based is. It's a scary prospect if you're a nonprofit, or as that conversation upstairs suggests, if you're just part of the nonprofit community that is worried about certain groups of kids, certain groups, certain communities, and so forth, because there's a lot of stuff that can look like it doesn't work. So I just think, Paul, I don't know if you want to chime in on that, because you did it from the SIP perspective, but you sat in those same meetings, and it was, to say it was the blind leading the blind.
Well, I think, we've got a lot of people trying to figure things out.
Exactly.
And all of us in this room, people throughout the government, hats off to Kathy and OMB, are really trying to just influence the behavior on really, really important decisions of people who are, scattered throughout the government, who have all sorts of different perspectives and whatnot. But this point that John just made in terms of the lack of how ill-equipped a lot of people in the government are to just do this is really huge. And certainly in our case, that didn't stop us from dedicating limitless hours.
And making...
So there's a lot of good news in there.
So I really think that the nonprofits need, the smart, sophisticated nonprofits need to help government figure out how to do this in a way that's smart and fair.
What should we do?
I just want to ask Tripp, is this where you were going with setting
Exactly.
the terms?
That's
differently?
exactly
The power
what I
back
was just
into
going to,
the
John, I
agency.
agree. I'm sympathetic. I mean, having been on the provider side, having seen what you're talking about, now being on the funding side, having been on the public policy side, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the one thing I would say about this whole time we're in is we're in the early days. I mean, we don't begin to have the tools. You know, watching what we did in Massachusetts around the ROCA deal, I mean, the first 6-7 months were spent literally with state government having been out front pushing for this social impact bond deal that we did, to just figure out what data they had, and then to get it organized in a way in which it could be used in this case. And by the way, that was a simple query system. And you know, by the way they did it was with Jeff Liebman and the SibLab guys basically doing it for them. So I couldn't agree more, and that's exactly the point I'm making. And you know, one of the reasons I start with saying let's embrace this is because it is such a terrifying thing that it's easy to sit back and say whoa, 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 whoa. But I think even just getting the words out of our mouths saying we embrace this, this is good. And I come at this from the standpoint of what this is all about is helping kids, families, you know, the reasons we're all doing this stuff. That's why we need to embrace this, because at the end of the day, given what we care about, if we can embrace this, set the terms, you know, and commit ourselves over time to getting better, the upside to what we all are motivated by, what we're trying to do, could be huge. Now there'll be damage too.
Can I ask
Kelly, we got the 5-minute mark about 3 minutes ago.
Yeah, because we have to get back upstairs, or you've had your hand up long.
Great. So, as Dorothy mentioned, my name is undergrad with Youthbuild USA. Before I was doing advocacy, I was on our data team. In particular, my job, well, the job I was hired for, was to help the local programs give data to the Department of Labor, who, to their credit, has been, since we joined them, very outcomes driven. But the challenges we found, and it speaks to what you guys were saying, was not just that, frankly, programs weren't necessarily highly data literate, but once the Department of Labor had the data, they kind of amassed them the data, but outside of the, oh, we want these performance goals, they didn't really know how to use the data they were collecting. And Youthbuild USA got lucky that our relationship was such that we could kind of lead them on that work. But the thing that we keep discovering is, even once you collect data, the Department of Labor was willing to fund data collection, there's not much appetite to fund data use and data literacy. And so at the program level, at the direction of the program, so if we really want to embrace this work, we've got to put the time and energy, because this is time consuming and it's and it takes money, to making sure that we, not just people in this room, but the people in the front line, know how to collect data, but also how to use it to make the programs better. And that appetite has been lacking at times.
And I think what you're saying is then rewarded by whatever the public system is that is basically outsourced this responsibility and can learn from it, not just from enhancing the program, but ultimately, ideally, right, affecting policy up the line.
Yeah.
And so we're far from that, right? But I think your point is a wonderful one, that you guys kept the pressure on. I think it's what you're saying. It's a little scary, when you're on the nonprofit side, saying not only do you have to try and figure out how to get money from them, give them what they need, and now provide technical assistance, none of which you're getting paid for, right? But it is the challenge before us.
Let me stop us there, because I feel a moral obligation for return. And I need to be evidence-based to demonstrate that I listened to the rules and what they wanted me to facilitate. So I'm gonna throw this summary out quickly, and if it just sucks, I'm gonna roll. That it seems like the best way to build a pipeline is to actually teach government how to play Moneyball through tools, behavior change, this radicalization of terms in favor of the nonprofits, helping TA all around so that we're better able to use data, apply it, learn, and improve, and make allocation decisions. And that we do our utmost, or ask RFA to do its utmost, to let organizations know about the performance partnerships, about the various pay-for-success opportunities, and find ways to provide TA information to help nonprofits and localities compete well, and maybe drive some of these new terms into that. We get Is that okay? Does it not sound? All right, quick hand.
Nicely done.
Quick hand for.
All right.